Francis Scott Fitzgerald was born on September 24th, 1896, in St. Paul, Minnesota. He lived on Summit Avenue, which some call the most affluent strip of houses in the Midwest. It was on this street that Fitzgerald was an outsider, living in a house much lesser than those that surrounded him. His dad had lost his job, so they were living off of his mother's wealth during his childhood. He was exposed to alcohol at a young age, with speakeasies and bootleggers were a prominent factor in his hometown. He had his first story published in a magazine as a teen while he attended St. Paul Academy in St. Paul. It was at the age of 22 that he went to New York City to try and dry out and become more successful.
See, a funny thing about F. Scott Fitzgerald's naming is that he's named Francis Scott after Francis Scott Key, who actually wrote the Star-Spangled Banner, the national anthem. So who better to write, this iconic novel about the Jazz Age than someone who is named after someone who wrote our own national anthem? It's amazing.
Fitzgerald and his wife spent their days fighting. Zelda proved horribly difficult and couldn't let Fitzgerald be his own person. They often fought about their son, F. Scott Fitzgerald Jr., whom they also called Scotty. The fighting pushed Zelda to the brink of insanity and drove Fitzgerald to become an alcoholic. Zelda Fitzgerald was first admitted into a sanatorium in France where she was diagnosed as a schizophrenic. She was released after a year and then admitted into a psychiatric clinic where she died in a fire.
When Zelda and Scott, they called him, were in France, they actually had a meeting with Ernest Hemingway. The two met Hemingway, and Hemingway wrote in his journal that Zelda was, unquote, insane, and that she actually forced F. Scott Fitzgerald to drink alcohol to distract him from his writing. It's just proof that even Hemingway, who met them for such a short period of time, could even see how insane and crazy Zelda was.
Fitzgerald met Ginevra King in his hometown of St. Paul, Minnesota, while he was a student at Princeton and she was just 16 years old. She was the love of his life and the muse for most of his stories. They corresponded via letters for years, only seeing each other a few times in person. Their love was the most deep and meaningful thing that either of them had ever experienced in their lives. Fitzgerald claimed to have loved her more than he had ever loved his own wife, Zelda. Ginevra expressed her deepest feelings for Fitzgerald in intimate diary entries. Unfortunately, Ginevra suddenly became engaged to another man and notified Fitzgerald in a letter to him in which she stated she was the happiest she had ever been in her entire life. It completely crushed him. Between the stresses from writing and constant drama with his family, specifically his wife Zelda, Fitzgerald became an alcoholic.
Daisy is Ginevra. When they were exchanging notes, Daisy is Ginevra. Ginevra had a relationship with F. Scott Fitzgerald in the same sense that Gatsby had with Daisy. Then Ginevra sent a letter to F. Scott Fitzgerald about her marriage, and F. Scott Fitzgerald did not react well in the same manner that Gatsby did. So, since Ginevra is Daisy, does that not make Gatsby F. Scott Fitzgerald?
Are you nervous?
Maybe. I want to say what I was going to say, but I'm a little scared. So, in a sense, Nick Carraway is also F. Scott Fitzgerald, but F. Scott Fitzgerald is Gatsby because of Ginevra, but Nick Carraway is from Minnesota, and so is F. Scott Fitzgerald. And, Nick Carraway felt like an outsider. So did F. Scott Fitzgerald when he was a kid, and even when he lived in Great Neck, so I don't know.
F. Scott Fitzgerald tragically died at the age of 44 of tuberculosis before completing his last novel, which was published posthumously.
In recent news, F. Scott Fitzgerald's home in Great Neck just sold for $3.9 million. That's a lot of money. We think of it now like F. Scott Fitzgerald was this great writer, the symbol of the Jazz Age. But during the Jazz Age, F. Scott Fitzgerald was not who we think of him today. He became who he became only years after his death, and during his life, he thought he was a failure. It's sad that F. Scott Fitzgerald really never understood his fame in his lifetime. Signing out, Biographical Group.